Good evening. Good evening and welcome. What a wonderful crowd. My name is Natalie Turvey. I'm Executive Director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. On behalf of the CJF and Toronto Star, our partner for tonight's event, welcome to this CJF J-Talk, Politics and Democracy in America. We are thrilled to see a packed house this evening. You made a great choice, and it tells us how important we all regard the issues that are going to be addressed tonight. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, you can do that using the hashtag CJFJTalk. I'd like to thank those who make our events possible, BMO Financial Group, our series sponsor, and our thanks to Global Public Affairs for their support of this timely discussion. For the last 26 years, the CJF has been a steady and faithful advocate for excellence in journalism. When someone asks us what we do, we like to say, as journalism goes, so goes democracy. The CJF is a vital participant in providing programs and initiatives that contribute to better journalism in Canada. Part of that mandate is this public speaker series, where we explore the challenges facing the industry and we highlight the critical role journalism plays in holding the world around us accountable and transparent. Which brings us to the first 100 days of covering the Trump administration. Tonight we are joined by three of the journalistic heroes, investigative journalistic heroes who broke some of the biggest stories of the US election campaign and who continue to work to ensure that fact prevails over fiction in the coming months and years of a Trump presidency. We are delighted to be partnering with Toronto Star in this event, a news organization that embodies some of the finest traditions of investigative journalism and a fearless commitment to uncovering major stories and how they impact Canadians. Please join me in welcoming the Star's Managing Editor, Irene Gentle, to introduce your panel.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Good evening. I have to admit, I really wanted this to be a segue podium. I've always thought that journalism is actually one of the most punk rock jobs that there is out there. You have all these reporters, they're fueled with caffeine, with aspirin, and genuine outrage at all the injustices hidden in all the places where other people aren't even looking. In many cases today, there are fewer people doing the looking. And those who are, the incredible journalists who are still doing the looking, they're faced with this incredible challenge of those who are questioning the very nature of truth itself, who think that fake news is just something they disagree with or dislike. But in this topsy-turvy environment, in this crazy world that we found ourselves in, something truly amazing has happened. And that is that the many, many, many people who care deeply about democracy, about truth, and about accountability have turned these previously under-the-radar punk rock journalists into journalism rock stars. And we have four of them here today. So I'd like to introduce them. I'm going to start with our panelists. Susanne Craig from the New York Times will be our first I'll mention. Susanne became the envy of many journalists when she got some Trump tax information in the way, time-honored way that we also love, in the plain brown envelope. That reporting became a linchpin of the campaign, and it's still unresolved today. Now, New York Times in America justifiably are very proud of Susanne and claim her, but just on behalf of Canada, I'm going to claim her back a little bit today. Susanne is a Canadian. She got her first taste of journalism at the Calgary Herald, worked in other publications such as the Globe and Mail, earned an NNA, earned a Michener, and now she's on a Pulitzer path. Please welcome Susanne Craig. Next, David Fahrenthold of The Washington Post. David took his own persistent reporting and harnessed Twitter detectives from all over the world to uncover questions, irregularities in the Trump Foundation. That alone would have made him part of marquee reporting on the campaign. But then there was the Access Hollywood video leak. Explosive, jaw-breaking, jaw-dropping, and cringeworthy. and still, I believe, the only thing that has actually made Donald Trump say, "I'm sorry," to date. David Fahrenthold. Okay, this one means a lot to me. I am very, very honored and privileged and delighted, and I could go on, but you won't want me to now talk about our Toronto's own and Toronto Star's own Daniel Dale. Many of you in this room will know Daniel for his intense coverage of a blonde, erratic, populist politician with an uneasy relationship with media and the truth. So when that ended and John Tory was elected mayor here, we thought, what will we do with Daniel? Put him somewhere nice, somewhere quiet, packed him off to Washington. Obama was in office. Now Daniel spends his time intensely covering a blonde, populist, erratic politician with an uneasy relationship to truth and to the media. While Daniel was here covering Rob Ford, he did come up, he founded and perfected the technique that he has now become known for from far and wide, his lie detecting, truth checking technique that has made him a name in Washington and far beyond, and I'm so proud and privileged to introduce Daniel Dale. And finally, our terrific moderator, Neil Macdonald. Neil has been a general assignment reporter at the Ottawa Citizen and the Montreal Gazette. He's covered wars as a foreign correspondent for CBC television, been stationed in places like Jerusalem and Washington, and now writes one of the hottest political columns in the country. Please welcome Neil Macdonald. Enjoy the evening.
Over to me, I guess. Welcome. I'm always amazed to see how many people will show up to listen to a bunch of journalists talking to one another, especially given that we're not in the best odor everywhere nowadays. So it's nice to be in a room, oh good, where somebody wants to hear us. I spent 12 years in CBC, or in Washington as a correspondent, and I'm really jealous of my colleagues that are still there because they're covering something the likes of which we have never seen. Donald Trump, it eclipses everything, everywhere. You can't, it's hard to write about a piece of Canadian public policy as a columnist without thinking, well, I want to write about that, because that's what everybody wants to read. Donald Trump is kind of like Sarah Palin, except he's really important and he's in charge and he means something, right? He defies coverage with the normal journalistic toolbox. We are simply not used to a leader who turns every event into a narcissistic speech and sends out weird Twitter attacks against his own judges and his own officials and his real and perceived enemies. And we are not used to the giant, relentless stream of lies. The fact that I'm sitting here calling them lies is remarkable because journalists are bred in the bone not to use that word unattributed, and yet the New York Times, no less an institution than the New York Times, has decided to use it in headlines. This has got to be a first. And this president has declared, in his words, a running war with the media. Anyway, you didn't come here to hear me. I want to start with something that happened today. Well, I mean, you can start with something that happens any day, but I mean, today, under questioning about the National Security Advisor, who was forced to depart because he had been, the intelligence agencies had intercepted calls that he had made to the Russian ambassador talking about dropping Obama's sanctions while Obama was still in power, which may well be illegal. And it was reported by the Times and the Post, very good reporting. It was sourced. And Trump got up and said, it's the fault of the failing New York Times and the Washington Post, and the FBI and the NSA are basically traitors. Leaks. It's un-American. I've never seen anything like this. You work for the failing New York Times. How does it feel to be such a failure? I mean, that's remarkable, isn't it?
No, it is, and it's interesting because I don't think in this case we failed to do our job. I mean, we did exactly what we're supposed to be doing, which is to find out information and to report it. And in this case, it's interesting. The NSA, in intercepting the calls, did their job, and I think we, as reporters at the Post and at the Times, did our jobs. And I think Donald Trump likes leaks as long as they're not about him. So
Yeah, he loves, he loved WikiLeaks.
he does.
Remember, he loved
and,
WikiLeaks.
Yeah, he wanted the Russians to release the taxes, or to release more emails. So I think that's, as long as they're not directed at him, he's happy for them.
But targeting the mainstream media as the enemy, a running war with the media, the judiciary, and his intelligence. He called you a nasty character.
He did, yes, true.
Well, you are a nasty character.
Everybody knows. You'll find out eventually, everyone. The interesting thing to me is Trump lives in a world that is defined so much by the news media. He thinks so much about how the news media views him. He spends so much of his time viewing the news media, reading stories, watching television. One of the remarkable things about the TikTok stories, the backstory of Flynn's firing, was so many of the moments that precipitated it were actually people in the White House reading news stories about themselves, right? Pence finds out that Flynn lied to him by reading the Washington Post. And then Trump apparently decides to fire Flynn after seeing a news alert saying that some more news was going to be coming out about him. So he hates us, but he also spends all of his time sort of, consuming what we do. I mean, the White House, I don't think to him is much bigger than a guy who's on television and a guy watching himself on television.
It seems kind of unmoored from reality, watching it happen every day. But it's really serious. Like, it's the President of the United States and the people around him, supposedly what they call the leader of the free world in the States. I don't think Canadians call him that. But you cover it. Do you get a feeling of dissociation covering this?
Well, to me, what's interesting is that people talked a lot about that when he was in the campaign, and especially after he won, that Trump is creating an alternative reality. He's eroding, the line between truth and fiction. I don't see him doing that. Maybe in his own mind he is, or maybe with people around him he is, but he hasn't succeeded in doing that, I think, to a broader public. In fact, the ways that they did in the first days of the campaign, Sean Spicer going up from the podium and insisting that this was the biggest inauguration ever when it clearly wasn't. Kellyanne Conway talking about alternative facts. What they did was so sort of comical and ham-handed that I think people sort of laughed at it rather than being some sort of Orwellian trick to make people forget what was true and what wasn't.
But I also think that, and I don't dismiss it because I think that he has a very deliberate campaign going underway to undermine the media at every chance. He's not only labeled our newspaper, the failing New York Times, he's gone after the media as a whole, as the opposition party. He has threatened to sue reporters. He banned news organizations from his news conference. This is an erosion of the First Amendment of the Fourth Estate. And I think it's a very deliberate tactic so that at a certain point, his whole, I think, aim at the end of this is believe only what I say. And if he undermines the public confidence continually in the news media, I think that it just places a premium on what he's saying.
I want to talk more about that in a minute, but I want to ask, Daniel Dale made a meal out of fact-checking. And one of the things I admired or I liked about being in the States was they have excellent fact-checking. Glenn Kessler, PolitiFact, factcheck.org. And they were admired for it. Politicians would use the Pinocchios against each other. And you did a lot of fact-checking. But is there any point fact-checking anymore? Because when the lies come so thick and you're glazing people, oh, Trump's lying. Well, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
I mean, especially when his own officials admit it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sentiment. I get people emailing me after every fact check being like, so? And it's like, well, yeah, someone will say, well, he lies sometimes, but he's getting, he's doing exactly what he said he would during the campaign. I think there's a point, both because, well, there's a principled point and a practical point. The principled point is that I think distinguishing truth from lies from our leaders, or America's leaders in this case, is a fundamental task of our profession. So no matter what percentage of the population is buying what we're selling, in this case facts, I think we have an obligation to do it. And the second thing is that I think we can be too obsessed with the hardcore Trump guy in the red hat at the rally who's saying, fake news, everything you say is wrong, you're biased. This election was decided by I don't know, what was it, 50 or 60,000 votes in 3 states, by 1% of the vote in Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan. And so to me, if you can get facts, if you can slightly alter the thinking of 1% of Americans, maybe that's even ambitious, but you've done something. So I don't think we need to obsess over the 20% or whatever it is that's the hardcore Trump base. Get information to everyone else.
But they can go to other media outlets that'll give them another set of facts.
And they do. I spoke at Ryerson today. I was reading hate mail from my very hate mail filled inbox. And
I love reading
yeah,
it.
one guy said, he was very respectful, and he said, Mr. Dale, you are a fine journalist, but I suggest you visit Infowars.com to find the real truth. This other guy said, yeah, you do some good work, but I get my news from alternative YouTube channels. So there's a ton of this. And
That's really encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how you... I don't know. I think we just have to keep doing our jobs well and hope that at some point these people come back, or hope that they make a sufficiently small percentage of the American and Canadian population that there's still a constituency for good information.
Something happened 2 days ago that I thought was fascinating. I want any of you that want to talk about this, talk about it. When Justin Trudeau went down there, he took the Canadian press corps with him. And there was 2 questions for the Americans, 2 questions for the Canadians, which is normal with a visiting leader. And the prominent American reporters in the White House press corps were asking the Canadian reporters, I'm married to one of them, please ask about Flynn, because they knew that the fix was in, and he was going to call on reporters that were compliant enough not to ask about Flynn. And sure enough, they asked about your philosophical differences. I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah.
I mean, the American reporters asking about philosophical differences with the foreign leader when the national security advisor is about to resign. I mean, this is not just message control, this is question control. It's remarkable, and he's successful
Well, it's
at it.
not questioning. I mean, I think it's sort of funny. The only time the New York Times now gets a question in is on Saturday Night Live. Is sort of the, But I think you say it's question control. I think that they have the mic at that point and they're allowed to pick who they want. I think that the so-called mainstream media, and I bristle at that term, but I also understand it. I mean, he's the press secretary, and if he wants to call on other organizations, I think to a point, there's a value in giving other organizations the first question, and I think it's just a matter of over time, how does that play out, and are they giving a certain type of publication the question every time? I mean, I think just because things are being mixed up, and maybe it's...
But the fix was in.
I think it's uncomfortable to some of the people in the front row, and I think the question is are the people in the first 2 rows, which are the Associated Press, Bloomberg, the New York Times, the Washington Post, are they always going to be cut off? And if the trend continues, it's troubling, but I also think that disruption necessarily isn't a bad thing always.
What do you think about that?
I think that's right. I mean, I think you still have everyone basically else in the Trump administration seems to be talking to the Washington Post or the New York Times on background. So I feel like that we've had much more information about how this administration runs through leaks than we ever did about Obama.
And can we
He
say,
calls the Times every day.
The question at that press conference at the White House briefing is one thing, but it's 1% of what we do in our day as a job. And I just don't think placing too much premium on who gets the first question. I mean, there's so much more to do in so many other places
But in
to
what
be other than
journalistic
asking that
universe
question.
does a reporter not ask the president about his national security advisor he's refused to talk about, who was talking to the Russians?
And they've been asking about it, though,
Yeah.
to him directly.
When you talk, Daniel, about the alternative news sites, there's, I guess, more and more. Journalists have always resisted defining our craft or letting anybody define it for us or having it regulated either by government or by ourselves like the professions do, and for good reason. But there are some pretty wacky people coming along into our craft. And I mean, should we be setting any kind of standards, or is that possible? I know that's a terribly elite. I'm a member of the elite.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the inclusion of more voices is better. Today, was it today or yesterday, we had news that Gateway Pundit, which is this terrible right-wing, rumor-mongering blog, was given a White House
Yeah, they've got a White House correspondent now. That's
yeah.
what,
So I don't know if, I was not that troubled by it. I mean, I don't think that there should be walls around the White House necessarily and a code of conduct for people who are going to cover the White House. I think we just have to make sure that we ourselves are doing good, interesting work that people continue to want to read.
I think it's sort of an opportunity now for us to show people why we're better, you know, and through social media or other ways, and our stories too, to talk about how we know what we know, you know, how to show people in the stories why we're better than Gateway Pundit, you know, what's the proof for what we're saying, what we're saying, how many people that we talk to. A lot of people are interested in politics now that are coming to the Washington Post, the New York Times, or the Toronto Star that don't know us as, you know, as brand names and are coming to us for the first time and want to see in those stories what's better about us. And so I'm hoping through social media and through the stories themselves, you know, we can kind of demonstrate our value. This is a time for us to do that, and not to get caught up in, you know, Trump is so, there's things are so crazy, Trump is so hard to get truth out of that we should play more fast and loose with the truth. I think there's been a lot of temptation of people to push things out on social media or other places because it sounds like something Trump would do when, you know, the standards, you know, should be higher for us now because we're being sort of looked at.
Yeah. I would add, you know, I've started reading Breitbart every day, you know, the right-wing website run by Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, formerly run by him. And I think the stuff we used to consider the fringe is now running the world to a large extent. And so I think it should not be suppressed. It should be better read and not necessarily believed or subscribed to. It should be read critically. But I think we all need to, you know, from journalists to the average reader in America or Canada, you know, get out of our own bubbles and expose ourselves to even the bad stuff, because the bad stuff is now in the mainstream.
He calls you the failing New York Times, but really you're not failing at all. You're doing very, very well indeed because of him, right?
We like to think it's because of our great journalism.
But your circulation has been is at a very satisfactory level. In fact,
I think a lot of people consider subscribing to all the, you know, Washington Post, the Star, other publications, is I think a way in which to support good journalism, to I think continue to ask and to sort of be a check on government. I think it's always been important, and I think a lot of people see it as it's never been more important. And when I run into people in New York, I mean, they're constantly coming up to me saying they subscribed and they want to support it because they want to see, you know, at this particular time, and it's not just because of simply what's going on, you know, with Donald Trump and the four people around him. We're in an incredible period right now in the United States where you're going to be seeing deregulation of huge industries that's going to be going on. And this is playing out by an individual in a party that's now been elected that believes in these things, whether you agree with them or not. It's going to be a sea change in the United States, and we need reporters in all these agencies to bear witness to it and to report on it and to talk and discuss it critically.
The point that I was going to get to here was that he's catnip. And I mean, I know that if I write about Donald Trump, we have this app from hell which tells you exactly how many people are on a story at any given moment, where they came from, how long they're staying on average. And it's, you know, Marty Barron says he keeps trying not to look at it, but you can't not look at it, right? And if you know that numbers, it's like Palin. So, and CNN is the best example. They went completely overboard. And I guess what I'm getting to here is, are we giving this guy too much oxygen because it's clickbait?
No, but I think he's good for journalism in some of the same ways that you know, that war is good for the economy. I mean, you know, he sort of gives you a short-term boost, but you know, there's other things going on that I talked about earlier that are incredibly damaging for the First Amendment and the Fourth Estate, and I think it's sort of balancing our love of the story and the immediate interest that people have in it, while still being mindful of the broader issue that's going on in terms of his war on the Fourth Estate.
What do you think?
I mean, the thing that yes, he is catnip. People love reading about him. I mean, I think there were, you know, editors looking at those charts of traffic on November 7th probably contemplated with dread the idea of a President Hillary Clinton, and all those people go away and start reading about sports or something. But the thing about him is that there's so much chaos, right? Think about other presidents, how much they would sort of control the message and how they would stay on a message for so long, right? I mean, how long in America did we talk about health care before the Affordable Care Act was passed? That was the only thing in town for so long. And so you didn't need to check the news every day or every hour to find out if some crazy thing had just happened. And so the idea that you need somebody out there to make sense of it all, which is always our role. Now, usually the president tried to make sense of it himself before he told the public about it. And there's no effort like that anymore. So it's not just that people are interested in him, it's that there's so much more chaos that they're looking to us to explain. So it's a valuable time. It's a great time to be a journalist. What did the president of CBS say? I don't know if Donald Trump's good for America, but he's good for CBS.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of how a lot of us probably feel.
Yeah, I think the media did go overboard, but not now. I think it happened at the beginning of the Republican primary, and you said it's CNN. I mean, CNN especially, but others as well, handed over unfiltered airtime. It wasn't even like they were covering Donald Trump for hours on end. They were saying, everybody here's Donald Trump, unfiltered, and
Because he might say something weird.
yeah, and the ratings were good, and I think that was an abdication of their responsibility to democracy, even if ratings were good, to give him, I forget what the number, I think it was like 8 times more airtime than everyone else combined, Rubio, Bush, Cruz, Paul, etc. I don't know if we can go overboard covering the president of the United States. I think now it's like everything he does should be scrutinized,
So I want to talk about this word lie. Your editor went on NPR and gave his definition of lie. He ordered the word lie into a headline because it was sustained, it was the birther.
It was the birther issue.
It was sustained, it was contrary to all evidence, and there was malice. That was his test.
It's a definition.
And he ordered, and I think lie has been in the New York Times twice. That's a big deal. The NPR, it's a mens rea thing. NPR it shows intent and who can read what's in someone's mind. How do we know if he's lying? I just want to hear what you all have to say about about the arrival of an era where we are calling a president a liar. I've never seen anything like it.
I think we should do it a lot because I think he lies a lot. He started campaigning in Michigan towards the end of the campaign. He won Michigan, but
You use the word in your stories, but they don't use it in the headlines.
Yeah, but I don't know. He would tell this story about how he was named Michigan Man of the Year, and it was such a great honor. And he wasn't named Michigan Man of the Year. There is there's no such thing as Michigan Man of the Year. So it's like what other word in the English, what would you call that if your spouse or your sibling started talking about being named a non-existent thing, right? So it's I think I get, whenever I do a fact check, I call them, it's a list of false claims, and I get this flood of responses like, call them lies, or I fixed that for you, this is a list of lies. And I say, some of them I think are lies, and we use that word when warranted, when it's clearly malicious, when he clearly knows what's going on. In some cases, especially with this president, you can't rule out confusion, ignorance. It's not an insult. And so I think our job is to point out that things are false, because that can objectively be proven. Whether it's a lie or simply a false claim, I think is often less important than simply calling it out as wrong.
I agree with that. I think it's important to note when things are false or said without evidence. The use of the word lie, it's maybe appropriate in some situations, but it's not something that you want to use every day. It's a word that I think distracts from what the story's about rather than informing people.
Do you use it?
I mean, I use it when I talk about, to my wife or to my friends, but I don't use it when I'm talking about the newspaper. There's a lot of things that I think the idea of
So
an
what
intent.
do you use evidence-free claims, or do
Yeah.
no, really, I mean, those are the euphemisms that we are resorting to.
Right, and that used to be devastating, right? If you said once, a claim made without any supporting evidence, an apparently false claim, those circumlocutions would have been devastating 5 years ago, 2 years ago. But I don't think that the answer to that is to say lie, because then people are going to start wanting to call it a damn lie, or a worse lie. What's worse
Call
than
it
a lie?
a dirty, stinking lie.
Yeah, just say what say it's something that he said this thing, it's not true. I mean, I think that's powerful enough. And I don't think we need to invest it with that emotion all the time. I don't think readers get more out of it from doing that.
It's funny, it was the Times that did it, because the Times is, so many other organizations take their cue from the Times, and the Times is one of the most conservative news-gathering organizations in America, if not the world. And it was the Times that decided. How about you? I mean, how do you feel about the word?
I think that the Times, when they made the decision to do it on the birther issue, it was a prolonged campaign that the Times concluded to be a lie. He knew something to be otherwise. There was massive evidence. And I think that the word is powerful when the Times uses it, because they use it so sparingly.
Yeah. The other one was on
The crowd size. Yeah.
was it the crowd size, or no, it was the millions of, wasn't it the
Oh, the voter
voter fraud,
registration.
the millions and
yeah.
millions of people that voted illegally.
Yeah.
Which is
Which
another
he's
one.
not been able to.
But
to-
it's
He's got friends who tell him that that's the case. So, yeah,
you've spoken to this man several times.
I have.
And what did you take away from these conversations?
I mean, I think he sometimes often portrays an image that and a perception that he doesn't know what's going on. And in my dealings with him particularly, I cover his businesses. He knows exactly what's going on, and it's interesting that when you sort of dig down, I think I found him to be more on top of things than often he would leave the impression that he is. I think he creates an impression of chaos, and chaos is just order that we haven't figured out. And I think that there's part of that there with him. I think there's some things that he cares very deeply about, and on those he knows a lot. I think there's other things that he's not as interested in. And I think that that's where sort of his problems are now coming in. It's in areas like he's very interested in voter fraud. So he's talking about that while all this other stuff is going on. He's very interested in the wall. He knows a lot about that. And I think where his trouble, it seems to me where it's coming in is on issues that he's less fluent on, and there's other very powerful voices in the room.
Can you tell the story about the callbacks? About him calling you back?
On the weekend in April, I did a series of stories in April of last year on his fleet of aircraft. He has 5 airplanes, and I was talking to him. The thesis of the story that I started out with was just looking at the age of the aircraft. It's an aging fleet. And then the 757 that he flies in was from the 70s, and the idea was simply that these are largely a branding mission by him. But in the course of this, it was interesting because I found out that one of his planes, the Cessna that he flies, that the registration had expired. And so we phoned the FAA, and they boarded the plane and grounded the plane on the 2 days before. I had a series of calls with him. So he calls me on the Saturday. He loves talking about the planes, and he called me on the Saturday to do this story because I was going to interview him on the planes and talk to him about the aircraft. And he phoned me, and he was clearly in his helicopter, the Sikorsky. He was supposed to be in the Cessna, but he couldn't because it had been grounded. But he was interesting because I find with some politicians, they can't contain their anger when they're on the phone with you when they're frustrated. And he knew full well that I was responsible for calling the FAA and having that plane grounded. But he opens the call as if, and he'd also been angry at a story that I'd written in February. So there was quite a history coming into the call. But his first thing is, I'm going to make America great just for you. Like like I guess that's the personal touch instead of for everybody. Now it's for me because, and then as the call went on, and he wanted to talk more about the planes, and he's like, how could the Times find anything wrong with the fact I own 5 aircraft? And he was having to, this sort of devolved, and he ended up getting really angry towards the end of the call. But then you call him on that, and he backs off, and he ended up apologizing at the end of the call for getting angry at me for, never writing. You wrote the worst story on me ever, and you did this, and you did that. And then I say, well, did you read this one that I thought maybe he wouldn't be as upset about?
Didn't he keep calling you back?
He called me back 3 times in the course of 2 hours in between rallies to continue to talk about the airplanes and have this conversation. Like, it was crazy, and I was right up against the 3 o'clock deadline. We have a Saturday early deadline, and I'm trying to file the story, and he keeps calling. He's obsessed with the airplanes. He's obsessed with the Times. Like, it was incredible. I did a story on the conversation because it was so striking.
Now, you talked to him, too, because he found you searching him on Twitter.
Yeah, so at the end of, so I started writing about Trump's charity in February because he said he had raised $6 million for veterans after a night when he skipped a Fox News run, a Republican debate, held a big fundraiser for veterans. He said he raised $6 million, including $1 million out of his own pocket. So I started trying to figure out if he had actually given that money to veterans, as he said. And it went on and on and on, and I could not find evidence, especially of the $1 million that he said he'd given out of his own pocket. So finally, Corey Lewandowski, who was Trump's campaign manager at the time, called me and said, this is like 4 months after the money had supposedly been given away. He said, okay, we can tell you the money's been given to veterans, $1 million, but I can't tell you who got it or when or in what amounts. It's all secret. So, like, you don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to just take his word for it. So I started searching on Twitter. Instead of trying to call every veterans group in America, I started saying, okay, disabled American veterans, veterans of foreign wars, tweeting at them and including Donald Trump's Twitter handle so that when he goes to search his own name, which we know that he does, he would see it. He'd see that I had not taken this $1 million thing at Corey Lewandowski's word, that I was out there looking for the money. And it turned out, after a day of searching, that Corey Lewandowski told me was not true. And this is a question about a lie or not. He hadn't given any money. The money that was still in his pocket, even after Lewandowski told me he'd given $1 million away. So Trump called me the next night. This is actually the last time that I talked to him. And he said, I've given this $1 million away. He gave it to this one group, all in one big fell swoop. And I said, well, why did it take you so long, 4 months, to give this money away? He said, well, I was vetting the group that I gave the money to. And it just happened, I knew that the group he gave the money to, they had given him a Man of the Year award the year before at a black tie dinner at the Waldorf Astoria. So I said, you needed to vet them even though you had like a whole gala with these people? And he said, oh, that's true. And then I said, did you just give this money away now because I was asking about it? And he called me a nasty guy. He said, you should be ashamed of yourself, you're a nasty guy. But talking about the question devolving, so he would say, oh, you're a nasty person, you should be ashamed of yourself. But I had other questions I wanted to ask him about the money that other people had given him, thinking he'd give it away to veterans. And so I don't want to argue about whether I'm a nasty person or not. So I would say, okay, well, what about this other $5 million? And then he would reset and answer that question sort of semi-factually, answer the question, and that answer would devolve into you're nasty, you should be ashamed of yourself. And then I'd ask him another factual question, and he'd reset again. It was the strangest conversation. It was like his heart wasn't in it.
Because I think he enters every call and I think every conversation and any dialogue he wants to affect it in a positive way. So I think everyone's almost taken in isolation. I mean, I think and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I've dealt with a lot of politicians who carry grudges for a very long time, and I'm not saying he doesn't with certain people. But I think that his strategy is always, every story is taken, at least in the ones that I've dealt with him, in isolation. And he's phoned to complain to my editors after my calls, but he will, the next morning, if you have a story that he considers important, it's going to be on the front page of the New York Times, he'll call. And I always think politicians who engage, or anybody who engages, but we corporations, it's always better. Hillary Clinton went an entire campaign, and I think talked to the New York Times once on the record. In contrast, and I would prefer to have it the other way. Yeah. Dialogue and engagement is always good. Even if we're arguing and we're going back and forth, it's always better to have the person participating.
Now, Daniel, I don't know if Donald Trump knows what the Toronto Star is, and I don't know if he knows who you. I don't suspect you've spoken to him.
I've never spoken.
Although these two people have never been kicked out of Rob Ford's backyard.
Right. Wait. I was kicked out of not Rob Ford's backyard. But I'm not going to pick on you. But like I tell people about the power of the early narrative that politicians like Rob Ford and Donald Trump set. And even my friends refer to that incident with Rob Ford as Fencegate.
Yeah.
And it's like, my whole point was like, I wasn't near the
I know
fence.
you weren't
I wasn't looking over the fence. But like, these very, people laugh at them, but Ford and Trump were very skilled at establishing whatever the story was going to be from the outset. And once those perceptions are set, it's really hard to shake. And so that was my big lesson from that Ford case.
Well, I mean, not to stay on Ford too long, speak ill of the dead, but he did the same thing in that he had this legion of followers who just wanted to hear him bang liberals over the head and say outrageous things, and that was enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was interesting to me with what Sue said is that, when Trump bashes the Times, he often will then call the Times reporter, or many Times reporters, that week. So either, often it seems like his bashing is strategic, rather than a deeply felt personal feeling. Whereas,
I think it plays to his base.
Yeah,
there's no question.
Yeah, so there's a strategic benefit for him. Where Ford, he genuinely hated us. It was not. It was not. He would not look at us in the hallway. His brother would try to talk him down. He wouldn't agree, and he wouldn't engage. Even where it was to his advantage. We do a story about him succeeding in getting garbage outsourcing through council. One of his big campaign planks. Like, we want a quote from you. We want the inside story of how you succeeded. He would not talk. And so I think Trump is an example of, how either how ignoring your grudges or engaging even when you don't want to can help you.
Was it you that mentioned the bubble earlier on? I mean, it's somebody here did, but
Yeah.
there's all this talk about us being in a bubble in the Beltway or in Parliament Hill or in national capitals. We're now being told that we should understand what happened and make an effort to get out there and understand the anger that's out there about us and the elites and everybody else. I just want to ask you what you think. I've been to a couple of Tea Party demonstrations, and you wind up having these discussions where somebody tells you, get your government hands off my Medicare or something like that. And it's just, I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? And I don't know what we're supposed to understand about that. And there just seems so much inchoate anger, and we just want to see liberals bashed, and we want you to say, so what are we supposed to understand about that? Maybe you could explain that to me.
Great. As the failing New York Times, I think I think my view through the election and having thought about it afterwards is I think that the media in New York, not necessarily all in New York, but the media based in New York and on the, sort of the Eastern Corridor, I just think that they underestimated just the economic anger that was running through, the issues of economics that were running through the country. It's not to say that we didn't cover it, but I just think that became, when everybody in New York was, you know, their hair was on fire about the Billy Bush tape that you got. I mean, I think that you couldn't help but be appalled by that, but I think other people found that the economic problems that a lot of people are facing were simply more important, and I think that that's how a lot of people cast their vote. And I think that it's also just interesting when people sort of accuse us of being liberal and other news organizations. I mean, I think I sort of consider myself power blind, because I just think no matter who is in government, we would be asking these questions. But I think it became more of a power struggle in some ways than simply, you know, we were for Hillary Clinton, which I worked in that New York Times newsroom every day during the campaign. I covered Donald Trump every day for 2016, and the reporters covering Hillary Clinton were incredibly tough on her, and we wrote some of the toughest stories on her. So I think it's not, I think sometimes it just became, you know, sometimes there's confusion about what our job is, but I also think that we did underestimate some of the forces that were going on in the country.
The question about bubbles.
You are inside the Beltway.
Yes, yeah, I live inside the
We all-
Beltway,
we're
work
all
inside the
in our own
Beltway.
Literally. that's-
Sometimes I go to Walmart outside the Beltway, but not very often. So the question, I think, though, the question about the bubble, it's important. It was important during the election, but I think it cannot be the way we view Trump's presidency, right? Daniel was talking about this earlier. We can't view it as like, you know, when will the last Trump supporter give up on him, right? Like, that's not an important question for now. We're there to tell you what Trump is doing in office. Is he succeeding what he meant to do? Is he failing in what he meant to do? Is he changing government in some way? I just want to, there's been a number of stories where basically the media is waiting outside the house of a Trump voter in Ohio, and every day he comes out and it's like, is it, you know, what do you think now? Is this too much for you now? Has it crossed the line? What about tomorrow? You know, and there's two reasons for that. A, it's like, you know.
It feels like it's the zoo at this point.
Yeah, and also like this is not about, we're not in an election, right? This is about governing. So like, let's take a second and think about, let's judge him as he governs. And number two, there are a lot of people out there, and you know, my mother-in-law is one of them, for whom elections are not about policies, they're about identity. She identifies as a Republican because her grandfather was a Republican, and she would rather die than be a Democrat. And it doesn't matter. So when the Republicans pick this guy, he's her guy. And there's a lot of people out there who are Republicans and feel that way, and there's a lot of people who are Trump voters who believe in Trump. Their identity is tied up in him and his success. And so the idea that we're going to judge his success or failure by whether people who see him as a figure beyond politics, whether those people ever turn on him, I think it's kind of pointless. Like, let's just look at him and what he's doing. We'll come back and do an election in 2 years or 4 years.
Yeah, I think the wrongest post-mortem analysis of the media in the election was the suggestion that the media didn't cover the Trump voter, didn't get out there into the heartland, the real America, and talk to the real Americans who like Donald Trump. Like I was saying to David earlier, I think that was the most cliched, overwritten story of the election. Like, here we are in this former mill town in Pennsylvania. You know, they used to have lots of textile jobs, and now here's John. He's a union guy, used to vote Democrat, now he likes Donald Trump. Like, I could write that story without with my eyes closed. So I think people did good journalism from quote unquote Trump's America. I think what the media failing, and I think I failed in this regard, is in failing to convey the uncertainty that the polling data left us by the end of the campaign. You know, we had these models on various sites saying Hillary Clinton has an 88% chance to win. But that's not
Yeah.
that's not a 100% chance. And I think sometimes my own coverage lapsed into this kind of suggestion of
But I
certain.
think a lot of people lapsed because they underestimated the economic powers that were going on in the country. I think we let that feed our belief in it.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. But I think, so to me, the big problem was in data analysis and in communication about data and in a lack of humility about data rather than a failure to do good human coverage.
You know, on that business of the economic anger and the solutions that he's offered and people saying he's doing exactly what he said he would do, I don't know, I suppose there's disagreement on how didactic our craft is supposed to be, but what he is proposing effectively is making American businesses less efficient and less competitive by rerouting supply chains. So this is a conservative, supposedly a conservative, who wants to interfere in free markets and tell companies how to behave. This is anathema to conservatives. I mean, why aren't
So
we
you're saying
here?
there's gambling going on in the casino?
No, I'm saying, no, actually, well, no, what I'm saying is that I'm hearing a crashing silence from all the market guys on Capitol Hill that were so upset about what Obama did and even some of the things that George W. Bush did. This fellow does he have congressional Republicans afraid of him?
I think one thing that the rise of Trump has taught us is that there's less appetite for ideological conservatism than a lot of us thought. You know, that people who have been talking about small government for a long time are actually okay with government that's bigger if it works, if they feel like it's working for people like them, whether that's their own, you know, I don't know if Caucasians are an ethnic group, but you know, if it's working for people in their communities. You know, there was such a crazily dramatic shift in Republicans' perceptions of Vladimir Putin over the course of a year. And so I think it was like from negative 35 to positive 30 to positive 35. And I think it taught us that, you know, when we read this issue polling, we can forget how susceptible people's perceptions are to a charismatic leader of the party taking a different view. I don't think people are that ideological. You
know, today he met with Bibi Netanyahu, and he got up and said that he'd be okay with a one-state solution. I covered the Middle East for 5 years, and to hear a Western leader of any stature stray from the two-state solution, which is catechism, is seismic. Yeah. But you hear it, and he's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and he's sort of okay with settlement. He wants him to hold off on settlements, but he's kind of okay with it. But you listen to this stuff, and you sort of think, okay, but do you mean that? You know, do you think he means these things, or does he just sort of speak? Does he just pull this stuff out of the air? Because there are consequences here.
Right. One of the striking things I think about covering him since inauguration was during the campaign and then before inauguration, when he would say things like that, or he would say things on Twitter, where he would indicate some policy position, people would take that and say, well, Trump's going to do this. He said he likes this. He's going to do things that follow it. What we've seen when he's been president is that there's a huge divergence between what he's willing to talk about and what he's willing to do. And often he'll say something and then say the opposite a few days later and not do anything in either direction. So that's what's been, I think, instructive for us to sort of see the divergence between his words and his actions. And also, we're seeing now the consequences of his actions reverberate a lot beyond him. He has lost his control over both the media narrative, but also the course of these things, the course of these events. So, like, he will say things, and then the event becomes what follows rather than what he said. That's been a really frustrating but interesting part of covering him, is seeing him lose control of the things that he started and not know what to do then.
You know, we used to, on Parliament Hill, we used to try to figure out what Jean Chrétien meant when he said something. And his spokesman started saying, well, the Prime Minister's words speak for themselves, because most of the time they do. And you can't blame the poor guy. But
you can understand him.
But Trump is that on steroids. Right? I mean, saying I'm okay with a one-state solution, I mean, you're talking about dismantling the status quo in the Middle East, which has violent and serious consequences. I mean, you might be talking about a second intifada, you might be talking about more bombings. I don't know where this is going to lead, and maybe it's refreshing, but do you take it seriously? I guess, do you?
I think you look that he has either somewhat evolving positions on things, and I think he has lost control of the narrative in some ways. You look at Obamacare, and we're going to get rid of that, to his commitment that you're going to keep the insured for the very sick. Well, you can't do that under that system because the premium simply won't support it. I don't how all of this will bear out. I mean, but that's sort of the thing that I think it's important that, we continue to look at what he's doing and how those debates are evolving. But I don't know. I'm not in his mind.
It's
I
kind
don't
of
know.
a feedback loop, though, isn't it? I mean, we all get up every morning and look and see what the overnight tweets were. Because it just becomes like, what's next?
But if they don't matter, maybe we stop doing that, right?
Are they going to stop
I
mattering?
mean, like, think about the difference
You're right,
between
but are
what
they
Trump
gonna
has said
stop
about
mattering?
NATO and Russia and what Mattis says about NATO and Russia, right? And what Nikki Haley said about Russia. So, like, if we start to figure out, well, actually, Mattis is the one, the defense secretary is the one who controls what really happens, then we, the public, media, NATO allies, start listening to him and not to Trump. If Trump, so if that's the danger for Trump, is that if this keeps up and it turns out that he's not the one, even in his own administration, who makes the policy that sticks, people are going to stop listening to him.
I think that there's a curious antipathy towards coverage of tweets. Like, I don't know why it bothers people so much. Like, if the president appeared in the briefing room at 6 a.m. and was like, hello, I'm sending in the feds to Chicago if they don't get their crime, and then left and didn't say anything, like a verbal, if he said his tweet out loud, like, that would be a huge deal, right? So why, because he has typed it on his phone, like, why does that make it less worthy of coverage? So I don't think we should stop covering his statements, but I agree with David that we have to figure out, if it's possible, what
Imagine
matters.
if Barack Obama had done any of these things.
I think the mistake is when you let the tweets set your agenda for the day. Like, some people at the Times cover them and they're covering the White House, and then there's dozens of other reporters that are trying to make sense of what's actually going on, and I just think it's incumbent on the media to make sure that those are covered in proportion to other things, and it's up to us to decide where we want to spend our resources and to make sure that there's just a lot of other reporters spread out in other areas. I think there's an impression that because we do cover them, but I think that there's a lot else going on that I think papers like ours are all setting our priorities and deciding how we want to do it, and it's important that continues and that those tweets aren't driving a lot of that.
To what Daniel said, I mean, if he did, like, get out of bed, shave, put on a suit, go down to the briefing room, and that all takes time, and if he still felt that way when he got to the briefing room and said, then I would take it more seriously. But a tweet requires so little time, and often it's just, like, if it
But
just
he would
seemed-
miss Morning Joe
Right,
to be
right.
able to tweet about Morning Joe if he was doing that.
If this is just a holdover from his past life where he uses Twitter as a way to basically yell at the television and then forget about it, like, we have to learn. I mean, I don't know if that's true yet, but we have to. If that's what it is, then we view it a different way.
But you see that. I watch on MSNBC, I watch Morning Joe every morning, and you can time his tweets to when he's aggravated by something that they have said.
But there's
It's
this.
incredible. I'm just getting ready in the morning and you
it's
just watch it.
tempting. It's tempting to write that, but we're warned by real medical health professionals that don't indulge in psychobabble and amateurish psychoanalysis. But I mean, Keith Olbermann's rant on Esquire about there's something wrong with this guy. That underlies a lot of the reporting that's done in the mainstream media because we've just never seen anything like this. It does seem like there's something wrong with this guy sometimes.
I wrote a story during the campaign. It was one of the first times like anyone in America noticed what I wrote about Trump, because I wrote a story, I think the headline was like, is Donald Trump okay? And it was, I don't think I did it perfectly. I'm not an expert in mental health. I think I should have talked, I spoke to an advocate for people with disabilities, including mental health disabilities, but about how to cover it and his objections to that question, because there are a lot of them from people with mental illnesses. I think it's a fair.
Smearing people with mental illnesses.
That's what I heard from. That was some of the response. I as a person on the autism spectrum, or people would email me and say, I resent being lumped in with this man. No, really. It's not like they're not. They say he is. They say he's a bigot. This is a vile. Like mental illness does not make you behave this way. And I think that's a very legitimate point. So I think it's fair to ask questions about public behavior. I think it's impossible for us to offer a diagnosis, as some people seem to want us to do. I get tons of emails saying, here is the DSM
narcissistic disorder.
Yeah, but we just can't. We're just not qualified to do it.
No.
There's been so much coverage. So much of the theme of the first few weeks has been like, where is the plan? And if it seems like there's no plan, there must be a secret plan, Like Bannon's executive order.
Or a really, really clever secret plan.
Right. And so it's like wheels within wheels. Like, okay, so Bannon wanted his executive order to fail miserably in the courts, and so then he would create chaos. Like, it's harder for people to accept that there may be no plan, you know, and that's a struggle. That's a story that's really hard.
Sometimes a tweet's a tweet.
Yeah, it's really hard to cover that, right? If you don't have a sense that they know where they're going, it's hard for you to write about, you know, what people should take away from these things.
But in tweets where the President of the United States suggests that the intelligence agencies, which are a pillar on which government rests, are committing treason, or that a judge is not a real judge, a federal court judge is not a real judge, A, unheard of, and B, you know, what do you make of that? Do you treat it just like a tweet? This is a president suggesting treason.
In that case, we didn't. I mean, that
No,
was
I know.
when
did it again
the
today.
so-called judge on the immigration issue,
Yeah.
and we covered it. It was an incredibly important story, and we covered
Yeah.
it for days on the front page.
He did it again today with the FBI and the NSA. Do you subscribe to this idea that the NSA and the intelligence agencies are going to take a revenge on Donald Trump, that they just know too much and irritating them is not a good idea? And I've also read in mainstream media in the States that if he keeps on behaving like this, it is incumbent upon the security agencies to act principally in the defense of the realm, and it may come to having to disregard some of these contradictory orders that he issues.
I don't have a strong view.
I mean, I guess.
I'm not inventing that.
No. I think they probably are watching like we are, trying to figure out what sticks, you know, and, you know, whether they're live, you know, is Mike Pompeo the head of the CIA, you know, is he the real boss, and that's the guy they should watch, or is it Jim Mattis on the defense side? You know, I think they're trying to figure out, because those figures, Pompeo and Mattis, are figures that would have been at home in another Republican White House. They're fairly conventional people for their jobs with, you know, backgrounds that match what they're doing. So you could, if you're in the CIA, I'm sure you're thinking like, well, is the president just to be ignored? You know, this stuff that he's saying about the intelligence community, is that, you know, I've been really interested to see the stories about Flynn, right? Because there have been so many predictions before he took over. Trump will use will be like a dictator. He'll use he'll clamp down on the FBI and the NSA and the CIA. And it seems like those agencies have continued to work as they should and as they had before. I mean, Flynn was interviewed by the FBI a couple days after he was sworn in as NSA, you know, the National Security Advisor. So it seems like they may be trying to figure out, okay, well, is he going to do anything about this, or is he just going to talk? And it seems like so far he's just talked.
You have a really difficult situation that they could be on a collision course, and I think they're monitoring communications with foreign powers, which is what they do. So
That's
it's
their
sort of,
job.
there could be a collision course where interests don't necessarily collide here. I think where it's an unfolding story and we're still learning about it, that's their job. And that's the interesting part of this is in their job they may find out things that are uncomfortable truths to the president.
Their commander-in-chief. Yeah. The last thing, I don't want to let you go without asking about hyperbole. Do you think that there is too much of it in reporting on him? And I'm guilty of it. I mean, I'm talking about terms like short-fingered Bulgarian seeping into the pages and it's like people can't help themselves, but this is our craft, right? And I think it probably is fair to observe that you know, I don't think we're all left-wingers. I don't think we're all smart enough to be left-wingers a lot of the time, but there is an antipathy towards this guy.
I don't think there's I honestly don't think that people come into this from a position of trying to like get him because we're angry at him, because we hate him. I think there's so much of our jobs is spent just trying to make sense of who he is and what he believes and what he's going to do. You know, I think there is, among opinion columnists, a lot of hyperbole about him, but I feel like for us, it's really key to not, that is something that drives people away from our stories. Yeah. It alienates people, it makes them mistrust us, and that extends to things like Twitter and Facebook too, not just to the news columns. It's really imperative for us to seem like we're open to new information, we're open to having him tell his side of the story, that we're not doing this, you know, setting out from a position of trying to get him. We're not even setting out from a position of trying to convince his hardcore fans that he's bad, right? Like, I want to reach all those people, and I want to tell you what Donald Trump's doing, and if you're happy about it, great. I mean, that's not my job to convince anybody that Donald Trump is a bad president. I just, you know, what we're trying to do is tell everybody what he's actually doing and sort of make sense of it.
Did he ever react personally to you for disclosing his tax records?
Personally, no. His attorney, prior to publication, sent us a letter saying that if we went to press, that they would sue us 2 hours before we went to press.
Now, he has said that once this never-ending audit is done, he will release his tax records. And then Kellyanne Conway said...
He also said initially he would release his tax records, if we remember way back, and then he changed his mind and said when the audit
So
is
that's
done.
off the table, though.
And then Kellyanne Conway has said that they will not be releasing the taxes and that nobody cares. My position, if nobody cares, then you should release them. Then what's-
Pollsters say what?
That hasn't been effective so far, but I'm continuing to...
Nothing is effective. Pollsters say that 70% of Americans care.
I think people care deeply, and I think we'd learn a lot from his tax returns. And our mailing address is 628 Avenue. If anybody has them.
I think we're going to take questions. Are we going to take questions? Are we in a position to take questions? I can't see. There are microphones up there?
Oh, that's better.
That's better, yeah. So there is a microphone there, and I think there's going to be another microphone over there.
David's handling questions for the group.
I just wanted to ask, who's scarier, Trump or Pence?
You mean like if you had to fight them? I've seen Pence. He shops at my grocery store. I would say him. I would just say this. Pence is, he's from the Tea Party wing of the House Republican caucus. He's a very conventional politician by Washington standards. I mean, the things that make Trump unusual, the sort of variable positions on issues, the great communication skills, the sort of creation of a myth that people want to follow, or some sort of emotional story. Pence doesn't really have any of that. Somebody who never been elected president on his own. I think if he were ever to become president, he would govern as a sort of more conventional mainstream Republican. Not that I think that would be easy. I still think they'd have a hard time repealing and replacing Obamacare even if Pence was in charge. But I think Pence is much more of a sort of today's traditional Washington Republican.
It's interesting to see him defending some of Trump's statements because he and Kellyanne Conway are both saying, well, I think the American people realize this president says a lot of things, but he says a lot of true things too. That seems to be kind of an emerging strategy.
Try using that line in your own life, everyone. I say a lot of things. Many of them are true. Some of them aren't.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious what your opinion of the long-term effect on the presidency position actually would be. Because when you have a president who is standing in the pouring rain and saying it's sunny outside, and you're talking about how people are debating whether to just start ignoring them or not, I mean, what does that mean long-term for that position? And I mean, for the reputation as a whole?
This is the American reverence for the office of the President of the United States, which doesn't exist here. But, really.
Actually, the way people look at Trudeau is pretty reverential.
Journalists stand and applaud when the president walks in the room. They don't applaud when the prime minister walks in the room. But the question is about the reverence that the country has for the office, and can the occupant affect that?
I think we've already seen a lowering of the bar independent of Trump, although, in the context of the Trump administration. So we had one of Trump's cabinet nominees withdraw today, but we've had others make it through despite controversies that have sunk nominees as recently as the Obama administration, and certainly before that. And I think it's similar to what we had in Toronto with Ford, in that once you experience that or this, it's what can really shock people, what can really move people. And I don't know how quickly the bar goes back to normal after a Trump administration. It's just been a permanent changing of what constitutes scandal or what constitutes something shocking.
I think it'll make the presidency weaker, at least in the short term. I think if presidents traditionally have really centralized, in the last few White Houses have really centralized decision-making power in the White House, and if the White House now doesn't want to or can't put out a consistent line on various issues and it's left to the defense secretary, or issues are left to the House or the Senate, it could really decentralize power in a way that we haven't seen.
It's funny because I would think about it in two ways, because I agree on some standards. You're seeing, for example, he's not releasing his tax returns that could set a precedent for for presidents going forward. There's been people who have been confirmed who wouldn't have been confirmed in the past. But I think the question is, and even the other question about who's scarier, I think it's predicated on your views and how you see it.
Yeah.
A lot of people think Donald Trump and being in the White House is refreshing and that he's more accessible, they can relate to him. I think a lot of it depends, and maybe there'll be changes that come out of that that a lot of people would view as positive. I think the questions somewhat are pejorative by nature.
Well, in a sense, the Israel stuff that he said today, I mean, it's almost refreshing to hear the standard talking points about the settlements are not helpful to the peace process, which ceased to exist years ago. If we're going to declare the peace process over and the two-state solution over and move on, that may be refreshing. I mean, he may actually be, that might be something worth doing. I mean, it'll lead to other problems, but. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, hi. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you guys for what you guys do, because you guys get the information out there, and I just look through Twitter and feel exhausted, so I can't imagine how you guys feel. But kind of back to that exhaustion, I think when there's so much information out there and so much chaos and just a variety of different sources, people start to feel hopeless and exhausted and just kind of give up on wanting to even look at the news, which is what I kind of think the administration wants, is to kind of put all this information out there and confuse people and not know what to focus on. So where do you guys, as responsible journalists, draw that line in your reporting? When do you guys stop giving a voice to people like Kellyanne Conway, and when do you kind of decide, okay, maybe we should stop having this argument with them about what's true and what's not, and just where do you find that line?
She's more of a TV creature, but.
Well,
Yeah, she is.
I mean, but I think there's been an interesting, to the Kellyanne Conway point, there's been an interesting thing that's happened in the first few weeks since the election, where there are people that have spoken on the record about what the Trump administration is doing or will do, that given their status, they're sort of an advisor or a friend or a supporter or maybe even a White House employee, where in the old days you would assume that someone holding that role would actually know what they were talking about, and that they, that if they said the president will do X, there's a good chance the president would do X. And we're sort of going through a process of seeing who that's actually true for. I mean, somebody like Newt Gingrich, who was a big supporter of Trump's in the beginning, was quoted in a lot of stories saying the president's going to do this or that, and he was often wrong. And so now Kellyanne Conway's in danger there too. If she's going to say the president has full confidence in Mike Flynn, the president fires Mike Flynn a few hours later. Yeah. You can't do that again and again without being disregarded,
I think they're finding that there is a consequence. I think there was two parts to the question, but I think in terms of Kellyanne Conway, there's been a consequence to her actions, and just the shilling of Ivanka's, her clothing line. There's been a lot of backlash to that. The Bowling Green. I mean, there's been a lot of backlash, and I think people are actively calling her on.
Bowling Green.
Yeah, yes.
That's what you're saying.
The Bowling Green massacre. So I think there's a consequence
But
to it,
we have to
but the
quote
question
the
is
people.
how much do you continue to put them up? And I think it is sort of more of a TV question. I mean, for our paper, I think we would look at them as a source, but I think at a certain point, when you're talking to them, and if you're talking to them on background, their credibility starts to be called into question, so they become one data point in a conversation. It doesn't mean that you don't talk to them. But I think also there's just an important role, I think, that all of us have, it just in terms of setting priorities, in terms of what we want to cover. Every day we come in the morning and we make decisions about where we want to spend our energy, and I think it's important. I think it's a huge responsibility that I have, and I think we all just have to every day bring a lot of discipline to what we want to look at, and I think that's going to be so important going forward, especially with all the other things that are going on that are going to be hugely, just really, I mean, it's incredibly important to the economy. I mentioned deregulation earlier. The financial industry, they're going to start bringing a lot of the regulation that's come in, they're going to start rolling it back. You may agree with it or not, but it's going to have massive consequences to the country, and we have to be there, and we have to be watching it. The environment is another huge area. I think these are all just really important areas that we're going to start to figure out fairly quickly. We're already reporting on them, but those are the decisions that I think are going to be really important to make going forward, is how we spend our days.
But don't we
what we're
have to
looking
quote
at.
the people the administration puts forward as spokespeople for the administration?
I think on the one hand we can do that, and I think we also have to make choices about our time on investigative projects.
They have to be handled well, I think for a long time with Trump and with his surrogates, they were just allowed to talk. And I don't know if that should be the case with any politician surrogates, but certainly not with these ones. So I don't think the solution is to ban Trump spokespeople from television. I think that would not be productive, and that would rightly, I think, be seen as an example of media bias. But I think they have to be questioned aggressively. Interviewers have to come in with the facts, and we can't be afraid to cut them off when they're peddling nonsense. So I think it's...
I mean, their credibility is on the line here, and I think that the more that they do it, the more they erode the credibility of the White House, and I think that that's like an important thing to watch. I don't think they're just let on TV without anybody asking them questions or calling their bluff when they're wrong. When Sean Spicer stands up and claims that the crowds were larger at Donald Trump's inauguration than they were at Barack Obama's, and then they put up a photo that is photographic evidence that that's not true. I don't know how anybody can look at that and say that that's not a confidence issue that they're going to have going forward if they continue to do things like that.
And then he runs across the room with the podium and hits reporters. Yeah?
So the story about the Access Hollywood tapes, the tax avoidance story, Mr. Dale's great fact checks, all this really damning reporting happened before the election, and yet millions of people still voted for Donald Trump and he was elected. So my question is, does this say something about the impact of journalism today, and how do you not let it discourage you?
I think we have to remember that there was Watergate reporting before Nixon was reelected. Nixon was elected despite people knowing about Watergate. And so I don't think any of us can be arrogant enough to think that any story we do, or any month and a half of fact-checking, or any incredible investigations by my colleagues here will sway the election. That's not what we're here for. Our job is to bring people information. What they choose to do with it is up to them. And so I don't think Donald Trump, squeaking into the White House, by winning a few states that he wasn't expected to win, means that everything we did was useless. I think what's important to remember is that despite the failings of the media, I think there were a number of failings during the campaign, but there were also triumphs. By the end of the campaign, we knew that he had boasted on tape about groping women. We knew that he had taken a $900 and something million tax loss in a year. We knew a ton about Trump University. We knew a ton about his personal conduct towards women and other people. So
I think we expected all that would matter.
Yeah, but it's like, but I'm saying,
yeah.
But first of all, I don't think we can ever expect that we'll change the outcome. And second of all, who says it doesn't matter? Donald Trump lost the popular vote by 3 percentage points. What would the results have been?
That's not true.
Right.
I won it.
Yeah.
A huge margin.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
Huge.
Sorry.
But we don't know the counterfactual. What would the outcome have been without any of this investigative reporting? We just don't know. So I don't think it was useless.
Yep.
At Accenture. I just wanted to ask you, as people look down the road, if they look back on this, is there a positive that may come from this? I know it's really difficult to think about this right now, but sometimes in a really tough time, we look back and we think, well, we grew or something good happened. What do you see, I'd like to ask each of you, is the most positive thing that may come out of this experience that we're all going through in North America right now?
There you go.
I think for me, I think it's when you look at sort of what Donald Trump's doing, I think he's very good at playing to his audience, whether it's the failing New York Times or coming after the media as a whole and a lot of the things he's doing. And I think for me, it's really clarified who the audience is that I write for the New York Times, subscriber, for the reader, for people who want information. And I think it's really focused just how important the role of the media is every day when I come in, and how important it is that we make decisions that, about the stories that we think are the right things to be going after, that people want to know. So I think that that's been a positive. I think that the media, I think this has actually been in some ways a good thing for the media, like not so much his attack on the Fourth Estate, but just on investigative journalism and just how important it is at a time like this to be a watchdog on what's going on. I mean, that would be my personal takeaway as to what the positive has been.
Well, there's a resurgence of people knitting hats, which is something we weren't doing for a long time. So you make yarn, this is a good time to be.
And your own career has done very well.
Yes,
that's
my God, it's true. I mean, to me, the interesting thing we're seeing now is the sort of system of checks and balances that we talk about all the time, and especially in Congress, of the role of Congress as an investigatory and oversight body. That had really, I covered Congress for a while. Congress had become this very partisan place where whoever was in charge just used all their power to screw the other guy, and we had eroded the sense that there was some sort of broader good. And I think maybe if Trump challenges, if he winds up sort of challenging the judicial system and Congress's oversight, we may see those branches of power get a little more power back and then maybe have a better sense of their own role in this system rather than sort of as a partisan cheering section for one side or another.
I'll say two quick things. One, from a media perspective, I think the media has become much more aggressive in identifying false claims, doing the fact checking, and I think that's going to be lasting, even if we don't see another Trump-like character. From a broader perspective, I think it might be similar to what we saw to some extent in Toronto, with the Ford administration. We had a real resurgence, or I don't know what we had a surge in civic engagement, civic literacy. People were attending council committees. They suddenly cared about the council code of conduct. Stuff that you never paid attention to. And I think we see that in America, where people are reading about the emoluments clause of the Constitution. People are...
And the Logan Act.
Yeah, the Logan Act. We have a bunch of explainers today about the Logan Act.
Yeah.
People are reading about the Office of Government Ethics. To what extent this is lasting, I don't know, but I think...
It's a resurgence in engagement that's incredible, just how it's...
Yeah, so people are, for better or worse, for whatever reason, people are learning about the way their country is governed. So I think that's good.
And you know what? For people who have lived in other parts of this world, there aren't that many countries in the world where a single judge can override the president and stop. I mean, that really is something. It's unheard of in almost any other country. It would be very bad for the judge. That's American. Where are we? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to pick up on two things that Susanne said. The first was that there have been more leaks in this administration than previously, and the second is that there's going to be so much coming up in terms of, economic deregulation and, of course, the climate change issue and education. And while we're talking about the leaks related to Flynn, and or generally think of them very highly, it does seem to me that does speak to the fact that there are all these other little power bases that in this upheaval and volatility are going to be emerging. And I wonder if you can speak to that at all, because we can't say every time the NSA does this, it isn't related to some power-based struggle between, CIA, the FBI, whatever companies.
I think right now you've got two things going on. You have an outgoing administration where there's just a huge potential source for reporters for leaks. A lot of the huge hundreds and hundreds, thousands of Obama appointees are either currently still in or are leaving and have huge amounts of information. That creates one well, and then I think within the White House, you have a lot of potentially just conflicting interests and people trying to build their own power base, be it Bannon, Jared Kushner, Stephen Miller. There's a whole group there, and as they're clashing internally and trying to build their power base, you're going to see interests diverge. I would think, just based on seeing Trump and his business and how that's evolved eventually, I would think he's going to figure this out. And you look at how the Trump organization is run, and it's a small group of people, I think, incredibly loyal to him, and I think as time goes, he's going to figure it out. I think it's just he doesn't have the time on his side at this point. But I think you're going to see all these different factions, be it on the one hand, just the change of power that's created, and then secondly, a new power structure that's trying to figure itself out.
He's going to go after leaks. I mean, he could turn the intelligence agency. Barack Obama went after.
And that's an incredibly chilling
And
Same
Obama
for
went after
reporters.
leakers more than any other president.
Obama
Yeah.
did, and
Yeah.
he was incredibly aggressive at that, and I think you're going to see that under Trump. I mean,
You might want to consider secure communications. No, really.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
We
it's a
use
big
it.
thing.
No, we use it. Yeah.
Terrific discussion. I have two-part question. Number one, in terms of the international community, is there an opportunity there for the first G8 meetings and the G20 meetings for Mr. Trump to face some pushback that he may not expect, and if he wants to do things, he may see some change there? That'd be number one. And number two, many people feel that he didn't, of course, win the election. Hillary lost it. So who do you see emerging as the leading voices in the Democratic Party that will challenge him? And I just can't think of more about how John Tory's emergence as an opposition leader to Rob Ford, bringing sanity to Toronto, who can bring sanity to the U.S.? That'd be my questions.
Elizabeth Warren?
I'm bad at predicting this stuff.
It's so hard to know. This is a period of transition for the Democratic Party. There are various people with constituencies who are not the people with formal leadership. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has a constituency, Chuck Schumer has a constituency, but in terms of national profile, there's Bernie Sanders, there's Elizabeth Warren.
Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, is certainly considered to be eyeing a run. It's just it's far out. I mean, it's a hard thing to say, but those are sort of some of the names that are emerging.
I mean, I think that the fight against Trump for the Democrats will define the whole next generation of leadership. Like the guy who's the Solicitor General, the Attorney General in Washington State, like no one had ever heard of him, but he beat Trump and he was the first person to win in court. And now that guy's on TV all the time. He's like taunting Trump. So, I think, the Democratic parties, especially in Congress, the leadership is so old. I mean, they're like Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn, the three top House Democrats have all been there forever and have sort of stifled all the leadership underneath them. So I think if they're ever going to get power again, there's going to be a huge generational changeover in that party.
I think that's probably going to be, and I'm bad at predicting, but if I were going to predict it, I would think you're going to see a generation coming up I think the Democrats learned after what they went through that they need an answer that's they need to look out of the box on this.
Yeah.
But I don't know if years of, there's just a lot of power structures and power bases in there if they can actually pull it off.
And one of the challenges is that, little noticed during the Obama era was that Democrats have been crushed at the state level. That's where the leadership usually comes from. Governorships, for example, they've just been getting killed by Republicans. And so there's a real void. We had this old national leadership, and at the state level, there's just not that many people. So again, we just don't know at this point.
The U.S. usually, or has in the past, kind of led. And now we have a white supremacist, essentially behind the throne. How far do you think to the right, I mean, literally making huge differences? I know talking to people who have a lot of business and talk daily to people in the States, that there seems to be a really cold wind. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty as to where things are really going to go, just underneath the surface. How far is the white supremacy movement?
I'm not sure it's fair to call Steve Bannon a white supremacist, but there certainly is. The alt-right or the anti-political correctness bunch are ascendant. I think that's the question.
So we've done a couple of stories listening to Steve Bannon's speeches and his radio shows and other things. And the view that he espoused on those shows was, basically a return to, pre-World War I, World War II Europe, which is, everybody gets their own country, nationalism. We're all going to pull out all these agreements and not entangle ourselves. We're just going to all get along together as strong nations, which obviously, if you know world history, that has not ever worked out. So that's what Bannon has said. And he also, there's two contradictory things. He says that, and he also says that the Judeo-Christian West should unite for a war against Islam. He compares it to sort of the medieval battles between Western Christians and, the invading Muslims, like the Battle of Vienna or the Battle of Tours, where they saved Christendom from the invaders. So that's the way that Bannon has talked about seeing the world. So you would think, okay, well, if he's the one directing foreign policy, then we end up in a place where we pull back from international agreements, we lose our leadership role in the world. I'm not convinced that that's the way Trump sees the world or the way that Trump wants to be president. I mean, Trump really likes being president. He likes the sort of deal-making parts of being president, likes the prestige of it. So the idea that he's going to want to withdraw, sort of pull up the drawbridge and be kind of a fortress America, I'm not sure I see that. I'm not sure it's really guided the way he's done things so far. I don't know. One of the big questions for me is how much influence Bannon will have in foreign policy. Now, especially now that Flynn was gone. Flynn was a really ally of Bannon and shared a lot of Bannon's views on Russia and Islam and other things. If this guy, Harward, I guess, that Trump has talked about appointing, will be somebody from the sort of more mainstream view of the U.S. role in the world. Mattis certainly is. Mattis talks about commitments to NATO and other things. So I don't know. I know what Bannon's ideology has been. I just don't know what his ability to influence U.S. foreign policy is going to be.
Yeah, I think we've seen some possible winks to that constituency, like the Holocaust Remembrance Day statement that didn't mention Jews, which Justin Trudeau, took criticism for not mentioning Jews in his statement a year prior. But what was different this time was that Hope Hicks, the Trump spokeswoman, and others were very pointed about why they didn't mention Jews. They said, lots of people were killed in the Holocaust. And it seemed to be sort of curious, given the past questions about associations.
They were trying to be inclusive.
I don't know, but I think, I don't know if I.
Misses the point.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call Steve Bannon a white supremacist, although he on the record said Breitbart News was the platform for the alt-right, which is a white supremacist, white nationalist movement. But I think there are real policy questions with regard to minorities, that whether or not it's about white supremacy. There's questions about how Trump is going to approach Islam. I think he was openly Islamophobic. It was his most open bigotry during the campaign. There are questions with Jeff Sessions as Attorney General about voting rights, particularly for African Americans. And so I think for me, rather than worrying about is this guy white supremacist? Is this white supremacy? What's the alt-right up to? It's what practical policy things are they doing for whatever reason to make life more difficult for minority groups?
I think the question is, what is this uncorked? I think it's probably fair to say that there's the discourse on Twitter and social media has gotten pretty brutish. People are feeling very empowered that they can say things.
I think that's an important thing. They feel incredibly empowered that they see him doing it, and I think it creates in some areas a culture of hate and anger. And I feel it a lot. I mean, you see it, and it's given people a voice.
On the other hand, the reaction to the Muslim ban executive order. I mean, where thousands of people go to the airport to to protest this, and the sympathy that it created among people for they did it in such an incompetent way where it created individuals, families who were victims of this. It was not an abstract thing, and the sympathy you've seen and the willingness to help that I've seen in my own life and seen on the news for these largely Muslim refugees. I'm not sure you could have predicted that would be an outcome of Trump's behavior, but I've certainly seen an uptick in that as well, sort of people realizing this is something they need to be explicit and public about.
But I think the polarizing nature is what becomes potentially scary, and we don't know where it's going to land.
I think we can take one more.
I just wanted to ask you, at your respective water coolers in your newsrooms, what issue do you think will take down Trump, if any would? Are they the conflicts? Is it Russia? Is it the conflicts in Russia? Or a super duper egregious lie? And which Republicans, at least for the next 2 years, which Republicans other than McCain and Graham, if he was to go down, would be responsible for starting to take him down?
That's an aspirational Canadian question.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of those.
Yeah, I bet.
I'll say I don't have a water cooler. I often work in my pajamas in my apartment. So I just talk to myself sometimes out loud. But I don't know. Like Russia, it's so hard to predict what will take down a president. I think Russia is the thing happening right now. It's been there are deep, real questions. I think if anything is going to, that's the most likely obvious culprit at the moment. But I would never, we can't venture a prediction. I can't at least.
Seriously though, what would take down a president is impeachment in the House and then in the Senate, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Jason Chaffetz, who was the investigator of everything, says, this stuff about Flynn, it doesn't need to be investigated, it's all taken care of. He said that yesterday, and this is Jason Chaffetz. Right?
Impeachment right now is it's a hard, tall order. I mean, I don't think it can, we're not seeing that in the cards immediately, that's for sure.
It's, the Republicans in Congress just seem to kind of be feeling their way along and not wanting to anger the flying monkeys.
But I think you've already seen a change. I think that was true when they first started. They saw policy gains they could make by sticking with Trump on deregulation, Medicare, other things. But I think the Russia thing has caused, in the last few days, I've seen people, that had been previously very adamant that, like, this is not our job, sort of waking up to their own voters' unhappiness and also to sort of reacting to the Flynn story. I think that, I'm not saying it's going to take Trump down, but I think that is going to be something that's serious and has the potential to bring in Republicans who are, see it as something above, their short-term policy goals.
I would add, because I think the Russian thing is incredibly significant, and I also think eventually Donald Trump campaigned on making America great again, and I think he promised a lot of people hope and jobs, and I think if that doesn't come to fruition in the next 2 to 3 years, I think he's going to have a difficult time facing those voters again, just as a practical matter. I mean, there was a lot promised in terms of hope for them in terms of their situation, and eventually there has to be that promise has to be met or not, or there'll be, I think, accountability at the ballot the next time.
Natalie.
We've been treated to a superb hour and a half of discussion. On behalf of the CJF and the entire audience, I'd like to thank our extraordinary panel, Daniel Dale, David Fahrenthold, and Susanne Craig for joining us in Toronto. And I'd also like to thank the always excellent Neil Macdonald for the work he put into. I can't even do it, Neil. For the work he put into making this a relevant and smart and highly entertaining discussion. And finally, our thanks to all of you for joining us and for supporting the work of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. You can have a look at our website and our social media for details on upcoming events. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you, and have a great evening.